Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pathfinder, a podcast by Payload, the leading digital media company in the space industry. My guest today is Dan Wright, CEO and co-founder of Armada, a full-stack edge computing platform that not only just raised $55 million and came out of stealth, they announced a partnership with SpaceX's Starlink, the first of its kind. So a lot to unpack, so let's get started.
This year, the Italian trade agency showed up in full force at the National Space Symposium in Colorado Springs. They exhibited 12 groundbreaking companies showcasing their technologies all under one roof. From aerospace giants to pioneering startups, the Italian pavilion this year represented a diverse spectrum of expertise and creativity, combining tradition and innovation. Moreover, this year saw the largest Italian delegation the conference has ever seen in attendance. For more information about what the ITA is doing for the global space community, be sure to check out their website at www.itahouston.com.
Dan, thanks for being on the show. I want to kick us off with a very easy softball question for you, which is, what is Armada? Tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mo. We are the world's first full-stack edge computing platform. And what does that mean? We bring full-stack edge computing, including compute and AI in a box, to data, wherever that data is generated.
Why did you start the company?
I started the company because in my previous companies, AppDynamics and DataRobot, I just kind of been immersed in this world of data. And what I had observed, especially working with industrials, like think big multinational oil and gas companies, manufacturing companies, is that a lot of the data is moving to the edge. Lots of people are deploying technologies like cameras and sensors and drones that generate this massive amounts, terabytes, petabytes of unstructured data. And the world is still operating on a centralized cloud. And so something needed to change. And I thought that if you could bring the compute, the AI to the data where it's generated, you could create a lot of value.
So you have an interesting background because you've been an exec at a number of great software businesses. And now you're still in software, but there's a hardware component to Armada, which we will talk about. But hardware is a different game. So maybe how are you thinking about sort of bridging? You've spent most of your time in software, and now you're doing kind of software plus hardware. How has some of your experiences made you sort of the guy to kind of lead and build Armada?
Yeah, I think one thing that from my experience has helped is that I realized that the best leading indicator of success, no matter what you're doing, is building a great team, and a team that complements your experience. Right? We all have our experiences, our strengths, and as a CEO, my job is to build the best team where all the Lego pieces fit together to build a really strong whole that can actually accomplish the mission of the company. In our case, the mission is to bridge the digital divide. And I knew also from people that I was working with from the beginning of the company, like Trey Stevens, who's on our board and has built Anduril, full stack company, that hardware is hard. And so you really need to have people that have deep expertise in that field. And so we, from the very beginning, my co-founder, John Runyon, and I, we set out to find the best people in the world in those areas. One of them is my CTO, Pradeep Nair, who was one of the key people at Azure, leading, GovCloud and all of the international deployments, and really understands the hardware piece as well as the software piece. And then he's got a whole team. Kyle Gravener leads hardware for us. It's excellent. And we have, now inside the company, a lot of expertise at every layer of the stack, which is, I think, one thing that's really unique. There's lots of people that do one piece well. We're really focused on the entire stack.
So just for the benefit of the audience, because we might have all sorts of different knowledge around edge computing, let's just talk like, what is edge computing? Just taking a step back at its basic level, what does that mean?
Yeah, so edge computing just means that you are computing, you're processing the data at the edge. What does that mean? It actually has sort of been redefined with our launch. What edge computing always meant was that you are processing data, near the source, right? But when people have referred to edge computing in the past, what they really meant was the edge of the internet, the edge of the cloud provider's network, the edge of, the 4G and 5G networks. That was kind of as far as you could take the edge. And so when we launched, we actually just said, welcome to the new edge. And the idea was that Starlink and other satellite ISPs have totally changed the game in terms of the meaning of the edge, because now the internet is rapidly covering places that never previously had fiber. They had no internet whatsoever, and now they do. And so we're completing the rest of the compute stack and allowing you to process the data at the source. And there's lots of benefits of that in terms of reducing latency, cost, data residency, security. And when you're trying to run like cutting edge, large language, multimodal AI models, you can't really do it unless you bring the compute and the GPUs to the edge in order to run those. And so it is a really I think timely thing as well, where you've got this convergence of, I say, three trends. You've got, on the one hand, Starlink, going and bringing connectivity to all these remote, austere locations where it's never existed before. You've got AI going mainstream in the wake of ChatGPT and people trying to figure out, how do I apply the magic of large language models to operations versus just for the benefit of knowledge workers. And then the third thing is you've got the cost of cameras and sensors and drones going down 10x in the last 5 years. And so lots of people are now applying those technologies at scale in a way that they weren't even 5 years ago.
So you have a very interesting and bold statement on the website that says, 75% of all data will be generated at the edge by 2025, which is not very far from now. Maybe talk about, what does that mean? Why is that even on your site? And maybe tie that in a little bit into like Armada's mission, like what you're really trying to do here.
Yeah, I'd love to claim ownership of that statement, but that's actually a Gartner stat. So Gartner says that by 2025, 75% of all data is going to be generated at the edge. And again, the reason for that is that there's all this unstructured data that's being created by what I call connected assets. Think about it like, IoT assets, other devices that are connected to the internet at the edge. And a lot of that data is actually being generated in really remote locations, which we see as our opportunity to solve really critical problems. And that's the focus of the company, is bridge, the digital divide. But we are really focused on solving customer problems that really matter. Like we don't want to work on anything that doesn't make a big difference in the world and make a big difference for our customers. And so, if you think about like, how does that apply in real life? If you take like an oil rig in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, they're generating on average somewhere between 1 and 5 terabytes of data per day. And if you ask those companies, what are you doing that is sort of real time or predictive with that data? The answer in almost every case is going to be nothing. What they're doing is they're sending it in batch back to some location, thousands of miles away. There's a centralized analytics team that is doing some analysis, and then they're sending some insights back. But the latency on that is like 3 weeks to a month. And if you're trying to prevent, an oil spill or prevent, a maintenance, or you prevent a maintenance issue that's going to result in the rig shutting down, which costs massive amounts of money, or do real-time emissions monitoring, or even just monitor the rig when it's in this like really remote location, or, trying to automate using robotics, you can't have any latency. So 3 weeks to a month is not going to work. And then in addition to that, a lot of these companies, and not just, oil and gas companies, but mining companies, you think about mines in the middle of the Amazon, middle of Africa. You've got, manufacturing plants in the middle of like rural parts of Mexico. You've got, railroads that move through these really remote parts of the US, right? And in each case, they're generating massive amounts of data. And in most cases today, they're using it kind of like the black box on the airplane when the airplane goes down, which is, when the thing crashes and, the regulators come calling or somebody sues, you have some sort of, data that you can say, okay, this is what happened. And we're saying, well, why don't you use that data to actually prevent these catastrophes from happening in the first place?
To use a term that you guys have used, which is effectively, serving remote corners of the world, right? Markets in the remote corners of the world. How do you quantify that size, right? How big is that market in your mind today?
I mean, I think that market is already massive, right? And I take a look at it first in terms of the amount of data, right? So if you look at, if you just take oil and gas, right? 1 to 5 terabytes of data per day per rig. And then you think about how many rigs there are in remote locations in the world. The same thing is true of mines. And then you think dams, you think trains. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how large that market is. We've definitely, quantified it in a number of different ways in the hundreds of billions of dollars today. But I think more importantly, I don't think that is going to be a limiting factor. And I think that's only going to grow exponentially. And I think more importantly, even beyond just like a TAM in the way that people tend to look at it, I look at where are the big unsolved problems that nobody is solving? And a lot of those are at the edge.
So I want to ask a bit of a philosophical question. I've been listening to a lot of Lex Friedman lately. A lot of Lex Friedman. I don't know if you listen to him, but he always takes, he has these amazing, founders, CEOs like yourself on the episode, and he asks the technical questions, and he'll drop in a philosophical question. You're like, whoa, what is that? What is that? And maybe this isn't maybe it's not squarely a philosophical question, but I'm more asking you're talking about all these industries like mining, oil and gas, like pretty old school industries that, know how to make money. They know exactly what they need to do, take oil out of the ground, sell it. Right. What does all this data enable? What do you like? And we don't have to go through every industry, but I'm just kind of curious, for these industries that are in these remote parts of the world, what is the ability to do edge computing going to enable? What kind of efficiency do you think it creates that we may not even be able to imagine right now?
I think it's an incredible amount of efficiency, incredible amount of value that can be unlocked. And I think if you think about that, you can just take, one of any of these examples, right? Like if you take just one use case, right? So take mining. We've talked about oil and gas. Let's talk about mining a little bit. A lot of the large mining companies, their mines are in the middle of, nowhere, right? There's no infrastructure there, but they have massive amounts of data being created, by the sensors in the mines. And there is a massive cost to, for example, conveyor outages. A lot of them have fires in their conveyors, different maintenance issues. And as a result of that, many of them lose hundreds of millions of dollars in, potential profits as a result of these conveyors shutting down. So it's directly affecting productivity. And then there's also the human cost. Like you read all the time in the papers about mine disasters, right? I was just in Brazil with some mining companies, and literally as I was there, front page of the newspapers, another mine disaster. There's people that are killed all the time. And a lot of those companies are now looking to move towards automation. Even, they're working with autonomous mining trucks, and they're trying to automate as much of those processes as possible because it's extremely dangerous work. There's no way you can do that unless you bring the compute to the edge. And when I say the edge, I'm talking about the mine, the very remote mine in the middle of, the Amazon or the middle of Africa or any other of a number of other locations.
All right. Good answer. I buy it. So let's talk about Starlink. So you have a relationship with Starlink that's definitely turned some heads, mainly because just that's not in SpaceX's DNA to throw out partnerships and just in general, right? You don't hear that very often. So maybe talk a little bit about what is Armada's relationship with Starlink.
Yeah, I mean we're fortunate to have been working with them from the very beginning of the company, and they've been really helpful in a number of ways. I mean, so one is just the inspiration for the company. I always say I think if there was no Starlink, there probably would be no Armada, because the fact that they're bringing internet to all these really austere locations makes what we do possible in the first place. And it also kind of sparks, the imagination, the belief that we can solve these really big problems at the edge by completing the rest of the compute stack. The second thing is we have what we like to talk about as engineering simpatico. So our engineers work really closely together. And what we do is try to make sure that everything we build is very complementary to what they build and solves more problems for a customer. And that is one really nice thing about our work together, is that we're both very, very focused on the North Star, which is like heal the customer's pain, solve real problems that matter. And if we can unlock, more of these killer use cases that are really valuable, that solve real world problems, leveraging Starlink, it's a win-win, right? Because ultimately, they're hoping to solve more problems in the world, and so are we. And everybody gets, value from that. And then, the other thing is on, the go-to-market side, we have seen that a lot of the companies that we're talking to, they are looking to also deploy Starlink. And so, we're an authorized reseller of Starlink, in addition to being obviously a technology partner. And so whether, somebody already has Starlink or is looking to buy Starlink, but also wants it, to be used in a way that we can help enable, whether it's, bonding multiple terminals together to create a bigger pipe, or actually bringing the Galleons to the edge to process data, or taking, drones like, for example, Skydio drones, and processing that data in a really remote location. Think about like maybe a defense use case. We can enable all of that in a way that is just additive to what Starlink does by itself.
How do you foresee the Starlink Armada partnership evolving over time? Like, can Starlink go to another edge computing platform and build a similar relationship? How have you guys set up that partnership?
Yeah, I mean, again, we've really been just focused on, number one, like making sure that our engineering teams work really well together. And I think there's a lot of mutual respect there. And then secondly, making sure that the relationship is like very symbiotic, and that we're solving real problems that matter for customers together. And I think the rest kind of takes care of itself if you do those things well. And so that's been our focus. I think if we do that well, my goal would be that over time, there's, more customers using Starlink and Armada than any other combination in the market. And I think, especially in these areas that we're targeting, we have the ability to, kind of quickly showcase some of these customers as heroes, because as you said, a lot of them have not even, a lot of these businesses haven't changed in decades in terms of how they're operated, and we can catch them up extremely quick. And these are like important bleeding heart of America type of industries, whether you're talking about railroads or mines or, oil and gas, you name it, things that are the backbone of our economy. And we can, work with Starlink to help those companies to really do some innovative things. And as far as like others doing it, I kind of have learned over the course of my career not to worry too much about competitors. I think if you focus on building a great company and you do the right things continually, and you build the best team, then you'll be in good shape.
So I have two sort of what I would call obvious questions that I have to ask as it relates to Starlink, and then we can move on. So obvious question one is, you mentioned that you'd been already working with them for a year, which means that pretty much since Armada's inception, how did you convince SpaceX and Starlink to work with you? Like, that seems like a monumental achievement, right? Or maybe it didn't go that. Maybe they came to you. How did that relationship even form?
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate that we have some common investors and mutual friends. So, that's always a good place to start. And then I think the other thing is we just shared sort of this aligned vision about solving really important problems for customers. And then the other thing that really helped is that we have a great engineering team. Like, if anybody who knows Starlink knows that their engineers are like best of the best. That's the only way you stick around there. And they only want to work with really amazing engineering teams. And I think we definitely have that. And so that was a really important part of it. And then what has continued to help is that as we start working with these customers, they're seeing the value and relaying that also to Starlink. So there's like this positive reinforcement of, we can help solve problems together. And then ultimately, like if we do our job well, people will be using more Starlink. And so it benefits them because they can sell more Starlink as well.
Right. And then I guess obvious question too would more be like, I have to imagine investors have asked you like, is there any risk with the Starlink partnership from the perspective of, if Starlink went away, can Armada still be successful?
Yeah. I mean, so again, our North Star has always been like, let's do what's best for the customer. And that's also Starlink's North Star. So that's helped. So I think you asked a question too. So just to answer directly, you asked, is it, sort of exclusive? It's not exclusive on either side. We work, together, to solve customer problems. But, if a customer wants to use multiple forms of connectivity, which a lot of customers do, right? A lot of customers don't want to rely on just one form of connectivity because even if, Starlink doesn't go away completely, which seems, highly unlikely, but there's some sort of disruption in service. A lot of customers are looking to optimize based on multiple forms of connectivity for performance and cost. So it's both. And so we can help them do that. And one way we do that is that we just work with sort of any form of connectivity that you like. So we could work with another satellite ISP. We can plug into fiber. We can plug into a public 4G or 5G connection. And then in addition to that, these Galleons, these modular data centers come with a private 5G connection as well. So there's multiple ways to solve the connectivity problem. But we do think, Starlink is a key piece of that because it's rapidly covering a lot of locations that haven't had connectivity.
All right. So different parts of the Armada ecosystem have already come up. So let's do that. Let's walk through what is the Armada ecosystem today? Like, how does that all work? And, what can customers really buy from you?
Yeah. So we are building the company as a platform company. So the platform is called Commander. That's like our operating system. And on top of that, we have 3 different products today. We have what we've been talking about with the Galleons, the full stack product, which we call Edge. And we have a fleet map. So if you open up our operating system, the first thing you see is like what we call the fleet map, which is a map of the world. And in that, you can see all of your Galleons, these modular data centers, and you can manage them all centrally. And then you can do one-click deployment of any software or AI application that you want to run at the edge to as many of your Galleons as you want. So it operates like a sort of private distributed cloud that you can manage centrally. And then our second product is called Connect. And what that allows you to do, that's a SaaS product. And if you just want to start by solving your sort of management of your connectivity and IoT, that's what that product does. And today, what you can already do in there is sort of get a enterprise management layer that works hand in hand with Starlink and does things like bonding multiple Starlink terminals together so that you can get a bigger pipe for more data in these remote locations. You can do fleet management using the fleet map. We have an AI assistant that will actually alert you of any potential performance issues, even issues that may be coming up due to changes in weather so that you can, maybe switch to another form of connectivity as one example. Or if you want to do things like role-based access control or have, SLAs, like those are the types of things that you can do with that Connect product. And then we're also now incorporating, different things that people want to use. So drones, cameras, those sorts of things also being able to be managed centrally. And then the last product is Edge AI. So if you want to take, these AI applications, kind of cutting edge, large language and multimodal models and run them, you can run them on existing infrastructure. So you can run them, in the cloud on-prem infrastructure or oftentimes what we think is the best way to get the best performance at the lowest cost is to run them on our Galleons at the edge. And again, it's one-click deployment. And then the last thing is, just like you have with some other companies with the marketplace, we have our own marketplace where you can buy different things. And the goal is to be like one-stop shopping for the edge. If you want to buy Starlink, if you want to buy a drone, if you want to buy a software or an AI application that you want to run at the edge, you can, purchase that all through our marketplace, and then it goes into your applications, and then it's one click and you can have it at any of your sites, whether that's delivering Starlink there or that is running one of these cutting edge AI apps.
How are you, so the marketplace is very interesting. How are you building that marketplace? How are you creating the demand for third parties to want to build on the marketplace while you're still kind of obviously building out your current customer base? How's that been so far?
So it helps when your first marketplace partner is Starlink. That helps. The marketplace collaborator. And then the second thing is we've really just been customer led. We've asked our customers what are the different things that they want to run at the edge. And sometimes that's a drone. Sometimes it's a robot. Sometimes it's a software or AI application. Our philosophy is never to reinvent the wheel. So if something is already built, we always try to partner. And we have a team that is just focused on the marketplace, focused on these integrations. And then if, something doesn't exist somewhere else, that's the only time that we'll build a first party app to do that. And then the other thing that's really helped is that the way our stack is built, it is extremely easy to integrate with. And so if somebody decides to partner with us, it's really, really easy to get them up and running in the marketplace and then make that available to customers. And I always say, like, it's a win-win-win, because for us, it's a win. We're solving more problems for the customer at the edge. For the customer, it's the win because they're getting their problem solved and it's one-stop shopping. And for all these partners, it's a big win because it's low-touch distribution. They don't have to hire a bunch of sellers to distribute their products. Instead, they can just work with us and we can sort of handle the distribution for them, because these things can run a lot of different apps at the edge. And what's been really interesting is we've had, really large companies at an early stage want to, do that with us. And then we've also had some like really interesting sort of cutting edge startups, like startups that are using hyperspectral data. Like we're partnering with a company called Metaspectral, which is using hyperspectral data to do things like, figure out where's the best place to mine, which is that exploration process is historically very manual and takes years for people to survey large areas of land. We're basically working with them to speed that up. We don't need to build that app ourselves because they already built it, and we can just run it on our stack.
Let's talk about Galleon for a second, right? The concept of a mobile data center is not necessarily new. Obviously, your software stack behind it is part of it. But maybe talk a little bit about, from a hardware perspective, how differentiated is Galleon?
Yeah, it's different than what's existed in a few ways. One is these things are highly ruggedized, so they're built to withstand extreme hot, extreme cold. They're built for very, sort of rugged conditions where you can even, drop them. They can withstand a lot of punishment. And in addition to that, they're mobile. So there's multiple form factors, but, one form factor you could take on the back of a truck and move it around. You could take it on a train. You could take it on a ship. There's another smaller form factor that you can take, for example, by helicopter in a C-130. Drop it in some really remote location. When you're done with it, you move it to the next. And so this like ruggedized infrastructure that can withstand a lot of punishment, the most remote environments, and be moved around and sort of repurposed as needed. Nobody's really done that. And then the other thing that's really unique is like when you talk about modular data centers, most people talk about them in terms of just hardware, right? It's like, hey, we'll give you some servers in a box and you can do some stuff at the edge. Nobody has done it in terms of that plus all the sort of critical monitoring, the actual, OS that we're talking about where you can manage all these things centrally, and then, being able to run the different AI applications on top. That is very unique. And then the last thing is what we call innovation and execution, which is being able to deliver these as like a plug and play thing that can be used by people who are not IT people, because the people on the rigs and in the mines and on the trains, they are not IT people. They're professionals trying to do a job, and make it plug and play. And the mental model for this is like the same way that ChatGPT sort of helped AI go mainstream because everybody could figure out how to play with that on their phone. We're doing the same thing, but we're doing it for the operators that are, really helping to drive the economy.
So you alluded a little bit to customers, but maybe just talk a little bit about customer traction so far, the types of industries that you're working with. Are you going after whoever needs something right now? How do you have a focus on like, hey, we're going to focus on oil and gas, we're going to focus on mining, we're going to focus on XYZ, or maybe talk a little bit about that. And then is your product right now out in the field, or are you yet to deliver it?
Yeah. So we have our product out in the field. We have already produced a couple of these Galleons that are in the wild. We have one up in Seattle right now. We have another one that is sort of in transit. It's in Phoenix, but we're planning to send it out to Houston. We have these different AI applications running at the edge. All of the products that I mentioned are sort of ready to go today. And what we've seen is, rather than focusing on like one industry over another, although we are focused on just industrials, as I mentioned, and then in the public sector, we're focused on, defense, intelligence, and then state and local. We focus on like use cases that actually work across all those different areas. So for example, we're working with like a major manufacturer and entertainment company, and they're using drones to film things in very remote locations, process the data from the drones, and then be able to send just certain shots back. Well, that same use case is going to be directly applicable in the defense context or the intelligence context or security or emergency response. And so we think about it in terms of just really valuable use cases that span all of those different areas. And the nice thing is, because of the way that we built the platform, it's very flexible, and you can use like the same form factor for all of it. And then by doing the marketplace in terms of like the sort of custom applications by industry as much as possible, we're trying to partner for that and have others build those on top of their stack. And then also customers can bring their own models and run it at the edge on top of the stack.
What is the smallest size of customer that's still relevant to Armada?
Good question. I think we are starting with some of the larger companies, right? We're starting with primarily global 2000 companies. And the reason is those are the ones that have just massive needs around data in remote locations. Like if you are a small company in any of the industries that I mentioned, you may not have that many rigs or mines or factories, right? But the ones that have, the large ones have the biggest needs, and they're also the ones where we can have the most immediate impact in a positive way. And then I also know from experience, like once you get the larger customers, it's easier once you have those case studies to go to everybody else. And so right now we're mainly focused on the global 2000, obviously also in the public sector, as I mentioned. And so, that's how we'll start. But I do think over time we'll be able to help a lot of companies, because more and more of these companies are going to continue to adopt IoT. They're going to continue to expand into different areas where they may be using Starlink. And so by solving the problems for the larger companies now, we can solve all those other, companies' problems in the future.
Who do you, on the competitive side, who do you consider to be your main competitor? And how do you think about, to kind of state the obvious, right? Like the AWS, Azure, HPEs of the world that have their own edge computing platforms, of course. They may not have Galleon, and maybe that is the special sauce. But like, how do you think about the competitive landscape?
Yeah, there's not really a lot of competition in terms of people that are doing the full stack. And so when I think about the types of companies that you mentioned, all of those should be partners of ours, and like what we should build should be complementary to what they build. Like, for example, some of those companies, are already partners with some of the companies that we're talking to, and they may want to use some of those technologies in combination with what we built. And we say, great. Or they may say, okay, I want to process some of the data at the edge, but then I want to send, the metadata back to the cloud. And we say, great, cloud is great, but you can extend the benefits of the cloud now to these really remote locations that haven't had those benefits before. And that's our focus. And in terms of, who is like doing this, I think if you were to actually look into it, our biggest problem is we have to educate people because, everybody says they have their edge thing. When you're talking about the full stack, nobody's really doing it the way that we're doing it, where you have the hardware, especially these Galleons that can go into very remote locations. You have this operating system that is built for distributed compute. And then you've got, a marketplace of first party and third party apps that are designed for the edge. And it's all done in a way that can be sort of delivered turnkey, plug and play anywhere in the world.
Have you what are some of the extreme testing methods that you've applied on the Galleon? Have you tried to blow one up?
Yeah, we haven't gone that far, but you're not that far. You're not that far off. We definitely have. We have punished these things pretty badly. So we put them in really extreme conditions, very hot conditions, very cold. Taking it, hundreds of miles in the middle of the desert. Dropped it in the middle of nowhere. Seeing how it performs. We've done drop testing, so repeatedly dropping it, from different heights, and it's just kind of continued to run. And right. Even the first Galleon we ever produced is still up in Bellevue, outside of Seattle, and it rains all the time there. It's been out there in the weather for a while now, and it works perfectly. And so we have a lot of confidence. And it's funny, since we launched and since we started working with customers, I've had all sorts of interesting questions like, what about tornadoes? What about, if we put this thing in the Antarctic? What if what about, a desert where it gets to be 150 degrees Fahrenheit? Like every type of variation you can think of. And we have a lot of confidence that these things will hold up.
It's so interesting. I'm just kind of, as you're talking, I'm just kind of thinking what a time that we live in, right? You're talking about, delivering compute power to the very remote locations of the world. I actually, just a couple of weeks ago, and I know before the episode we were talking about our new payload's new vertical around nuclear energy and ignition. And I was actually just a couple of weeks ago talking to a company that's building, nano microscale reactors to put in remote locations for energy. Because, a Galleon's going to need a power source, right? So it is interesting to see how it's just kind of exciting to think about how all this is going to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of cool technology being built.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time. I mean, energy, 100%. The other thing that's really interesting is just what's happening with GPUs, and obviously there were some announcements with NVIDIA last week, and then every time something like that happens, it pushes the boundaries a little bit in terms of what's possible, how much can you do at the edge. And so we're just excited to continue to be at the bleeding edge of that and see, what problems we'll be able to solve.
So you've raised $55 million, right? In a fairly short period of time, in a very, very tough market, right? What has allowed you to be successful in that raise? How much of it do you owe to your background as a successful tech executive versus how much do you owe to the actual idea itself? And I'm not saying you need to brag about yourself. Let's maybe call it the team. How much of it was the team versus how much of it was the idea? Because that's quite a bit of capital to raise in what has been a very tough market for a lot of startups.
Yeah, I think number one, you have to build the right thing. And I think a lot of people, it's been actually interesting when we launched, a lot of people realize that this is something that the world needs that it doesn't have. As we started talking to investors, as we started talking to customers, nobody has said, this doesn't make sense or this is not something that's needed. Everybody says, Oh yeah, that is something that the world needs that it doesn't have. And so I think number one, we're building something that really matters. Number two, I think, and this is important not just for fundraising, but for recruiting. There's the old like saying mission matters. I think the mission of the company really resonates with people. This bridging the digital divide and helping, these, industrials sort of catch up to the rest of the world in terms of innovation. I also think, you just look at what's going on in the world and where the world is going right now, the conflict that's happening geopolitically, whether you're talking about Ukraine or the Middle East or, the Pacific theater, more data is being generated there than ever before with drones and counter drone technology, with, increasingly autonomous, vehicles and other things that are generating just massive amounts of data at the edge. And there's a real need to process that data locally on site. And all of those trends, whether you're talking about industrials, you're talking about defense, you're talking about intelligence, those are all likely to continue into the future. And then I think the other thing is just the team, right? Like we have a really amazing team. I wake up every day and I say, like, this is a group that I'm excited to sort of go after this mission with, and everybody complements each other extremely well. And I think when we talk to investors, that resonated. And so, yeah, we've had a lot of, investor support. And for us, that just means it's an opportunity to go after the mission. And we're lucky to have some great partners behind us.
What keeps you up at night? What do you worry about?
I mean, what we're trying to do is very ambitious, right? We're trying to build a distributed cloud. And so, that is something that is inspiring, right? It is something that is a worthy thing to work on. But it is something that we need to be conscious is like extremely hard to do. And so I always think about, what are all the things that could trip us up and how do we get, 5 steps ahead of that so that never happens. And a lot of that is not like super glamorous work, right? It's, things like figuring out how you can, stand up manufacturing lines in different parts of the world and the logistics of delivering these Galleons, when and where they're needed very quickly. Figuring out how do we make sure that all of these different teams with different skill sets at different layers of the stack are constantly working like as one unit with just incredible throughput because we have a lot that we need to build. And at the same time, we want to partner so that we're not reinventing the wheel. And there's a million other things. And so, I guess you could say there's a lot of things that keep me up at night because I realize what we're trying to do is hard. And I really feel like, we have an incredible opportunity. And so I'm focused on making sure that we think ahead and that we, look around corners and that we're prepared to complete the mission.
There's one extreme environment that we haven't talked about, which is space. Have you thought about throwing a Galleon up in space? There's a lot of edge computing needs for satellites. Or maybe
I would be absolutely lying to you if I said I hadn't thought about putting a Galleon in space. So no, I've totally thought about putting a Galleon in space. I mean, I think that is an area that is interesting also when you think about just like what is going on in the world, right? You have Starship now. You have all of these different satellite terminals in space. People talking about new space stations. I heard talk the other day about a hotel in space. Like there's so many different things that are coming in space. And I think that is only a matter of time until you have things like Galleons in space. Do I think that there's still a lot of problems that we need to solve here on Earth? Absolutely. And for me, that's kind of our immediate focus is just there's a massive amount of need and opportunity here, not just on the land, but on the oceans. And Starlink is also bringing connectivity to the oceans. And so we're focused on, hey, how can we cover as much of that surface area as quickly as possible? And at the same time, we are thinking about Galleons in space.
Yeah, I kind of figured you were. Give us a 10-year vision. What does the company look like in 10 years? And feel free to be a little optimistic.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that the idea, 20 years ago is that we were sort of living in a centralized world, right? All the data was being generated in these large metropolitan areas, big cities. And now that's just not the case. A lot of the data, most of the data is going to be generated at the edge. And so for us, the vision is that, okay, if we're going to a world of distributed data, let's have a world of distributed intelligence. Let's have a world where you can actually make use of that data, where that data is generated, wherever it is, right? Whether it's in the middle of, rural Ohio, it's in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, it's in the middle of Antarctica, wherever that may be, just being able to make use of the data in order to solve, big problems, make better decisions in real time at the edge. And ultimately, the idea is that we create, a distributed cloud that covers the Earth and space as well. And so, yeah, we got a little work to do, but that's the idea.
Since you did bring up Starship, I have to ask, how do you think the next flight test is going to go?
I have learned to never doubt SpaceX in any way or Starlink. So yeah, I think it's going to go really well.
Good.
And I'm interested to see exactly how far. I felt like the last one was a huge step forward. I think everybody did. Like that felt like us landing on the moon or something.
Yeah.
I was like high-fiving people around me, as I think a lot of people were. And so I'm really excited for the next one.
Someone, there's a tweet, there's a tweet I saw online. I can't remember who said it, but it really stood out to me. It was just like, the media, hey, we can talk about the media forever and mainstream media and all that stuff. Part of the reason why I felt compelled to build Payload and do what we're doing is because I think that there's a lot of amazing innovation and that story needs to be told the right way. But it's funny, like, the media is always looking for ways to say, oh, this was a failure. Here we are basically, so this person said, like, we just sent up one of the largest vehicles in the world, or ever built, to orbit. And yes, we weren't able to land the booster properly and, we couldn't get the reentry right. But basically, up until the point where everything's coming back down to Earth, this achievement in and of itself is what the most of the space industry has been doing forever, which is expendable launch vehicles. You send something up into space and you throw it away. Meanwhile, here we are, we just launched this massive launch vehicle. We got it into orbit. And yeah, just because we couldn't land it, like, everyone's like, oh yeah, it wasn't. No. So I just thought that was a very insightful thing, because what they are doing now, every single test, even if it's not hitting their goal, is far surpassing what the industry has done forever. That's used to be standard. So I don't know. I just think it's a remarkable thing that they're doing, but obviously we know that and people have talked about it enough.
I thought it was crazy that anybody tried to paint that as a failure, but I don't know. The reality is, like, it should be mind blowing to everybody what is happening right now. I mean, that is, to me, that is something that should inspire every entrepreneur and something that should, give us a lot of confidence that we're going to get where we want to go, and that there will be, people on Mars and all of the things that SpaceX says is happening. Like, that was a huge step towards their mission.
Yeah, I was at a dinner. I tell this story a lot. I was at a dinner recently, 10 people, very, well-established, smart group of folks, good jobs. And somehow Starship came up, and like basically 9 out of 10 people at the table, or I should say 8 out of the 10 people, not including myself, like basically just, they didn't know what Starship was. Like, had literally never heard of Starship. I was at the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center recently, talking to some of the scientists that are building the Spark reactor for Commonwealth Fusion, which is basically the nuclear fusion reactor that most of the community feels will get us to like a true net energy gain, and make fusion energy possible. And yeah, there's obviously a lot of challenges that we need to solve, but this is happening. I'm in New York right now, a few hours away. you have a group of people who are trying to solve the world's energy problem, and it sounds like they're going to do it this decade, right? So it's like when I think about all these technologies that are going to be so generational and disruptive to civilization, and I feel like we're at this point where there's so many of these great founders, entrepreneurs, like trying to solve these problems, and I do feel like we're at the cusp, and like it still continues to surprise me how so many people just don't know, have no idea. So it is.
I mean, I think people are going to find out pretty quick. I mean, I think the next 10 years are going to be absolutely wild. I agree with you. Like, it's funny, when I go to even, my hometown, which is like 2.5 hours away from where I am now in San Francisco, people are not that aware of this stuff, right? It's out in the countryside and they're just thinking about, their day to day. But I think over the next 10 years, everything is going to change, whether you're talking about, space, or you're talking about defense, or you're talking about AI, like everything's going to change. And it's going to be really fun to be a part of it.
All right, Dan, my last question, and the one that always trips people up: when you're not trying to change the world, what are you doing for fun?
Oh man. Well, I have 3 kids, and my wife Betsy and I have been married for 18 years. So I spend a lot of time with them, which is fun. I do really love just like going to a game, going to a Giants game or a 49ers game, just hanging out with friends. And the nice thing about being in California is that we can do some fun outdoor stuff too. So whether that's going up to Tahoe or just hanging out at the beach, there's different things to do. So a little bit of everything, but we're pretty busy here, so there's not too much time for all of that. Yeah.
When you can find the time. Well, I appreciate you making the time today. This is great. Had a pleasure chatting with you, and looking forward to getting you back on the show sometime in the future. So Dan, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. Great talking to you, Mo.